We look back and go, wow, I did that, but I don't know how I did it. And I guess that has something to do with the adrenaline in our bodies. I got this lady onto a stretcher, lifted the stretcher. I remember using a post to help lift one end of the stretcher while I lifted the other to get her into the car, because my backup was about an hour and 10 minutes away. And I knew that I didn't have much time to get her into the hospital. These days, they've got a lovely electric stretchers. And I'm not saying that we did it hard and they're doing it easy now. It's just great to see the equipment that they have now is so much better than what we had, so much better for the patients. I was nursing at the time. That was the one career that I wanted. Mum and Dad let me leave school early so I could be a nurse, and I got in there and went, oh my goodness, this isn't for me. The position was advertised in the local paper, so I applied, and I had an interview. John Bradford at the time was the superintendent, who was a forward-thinking man, and that's the reason that I was able to be accepted into the service. I didn't realise at the time that I was the first female. Being in the bush, we knew everything happened on the other side of the Great Divide, so I wasn't sure whether there were females in the Sydney, Newcastle or Wollongong area, but I think it was about a week before I started, they said, just want to let you know you're going to be the first female, and these are some of the things that we'd like you to do. So I wasn't allowed to wear skirts or dresses. I had to wear trousers to training. I had to have my hair pulled back, and that was for the training. So I started and did my first 6 weeks at Rozelle. They really weren't prepared to have a female there. Where we're going to put her, what showers is she going to use? And I remember the first morning walking down the stairs and going into the class, and there were heads everywhere looking to see who this person was, who this female was. Yeah, we've got a girl amongst them. So I've got to say the group that I started with were excellent. They were really good. And I think a lot of the fellas in the beginning didn't even know I was there, because my surname started with V. We were in alphabetical order in our seats. I came in a little bit later, sitting up the back, and it wasn't probably till morning tea time. They're going, oh, there's a girl in the class. So, but they were great. They were a great team. I really enjoyed that 6 weeks. I then came back to Wagga and worked with Ron Savage, who was my mentor, who was an English gentleman, very particular. He used to polish his boots that you could see your face in them. And I remember when I started, he said, these are my boots. And I'm thinking, oh no, don't tell me my boots are going to have to be as shiny as his are. My uniform consisted of a female police officer's hat, so they changed the blue to red. I had a lovely shirt that the buttons used to come undone on every time you moved around, and a nice pair of high heel shoes. So when I got back to Wagga, there was a lot of media around First Female, and wow, she's come back to Wagga to do a training. I jumped into the back of a wagon and my heel caught on the back door, and I went face first down between the stretchers. And the superintendent was standing behind me, and he said, oh, and I said, aren't my ankles as good as the boys? Can't I have a pair of boots? And I had a pair of boots the next day. They thought it'd be nice for me to wear stockings and culottes. Would you like to look like, one of the flight nurses? So I said, no, I just want to be an ambulance officer, the same as the boys. Gender's not part of it. So I then got uniforms that were more acceptable for the work that we did, not lovely little pretty lady stuff. I did 5 months training in Wagga. Then they sent me to Tumut, which was a bit of a shell shock, back to my hometown. I had 5 ambulance officers there that were just amazing, fabulous mentors, just the best thing that I could ask for. Unfortunately, I didn't like working in an area where I had relatives and friends, and I think the straw that broke the camel's back was my sister's friend was in a car accident. I was the first one on scene. There were 7 people. and he was critically injured. So and we ended up losing him when we got to the hospital. I can't do it where there's people around me that I know. I was sent back to Wagga where I finished my road career. And in that time I did a bit of relief work out in the smaller stations like Lockhart, Leeton, Junee. Did a lot of work on my own, and I guess that was probably one of the big things that you get back into these smaller places and you're the only ambulance officer there. So I did a lot of work on my own. It took its toll. I then got married and fell pregnant. Spoke to the superintendent in the mealroom one day and said, "I'd just like to tell you that, just want to let you know that I'm pregnant." And the look on his face was just an absolute look of horror. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was letting him know early. So it was decided then that I could stay with the service and not take maternity leave while I still fitted into a uniform. They wouldn't allow me to go into admin or work in the corporate area. As soon as I couldn't fit into a uniform, then I had to start to take maternity leave. So fortunately, first baby, I was still in my uniform at 6 months. And at that time, I left for my maternity leave, which I did 6 months. I then returned for 3 months. At the time, my husband worked away. So it was difficult rearing a baby because I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I wanted to do my ambulance duties well, and I wanted to raise my child as best I could. So I spoke to the same superintendent, which wasn't the one that employed me, and he said, "We don't do part-time work, so sorry, you either work full-time or you leave." So my choice was then to leave. And then 10 years later, I went back to work in the control centre I used to do an afternoon shift in there, so I did that for another 4.5 years. I can cry, quite easily cry. So when I went back to Tumut, I remember going into the hospital with a SIDS child. My mentor was Robbo, who was an excellent ambulance officer. And I remember the look of horror on his face when he looked at the parents, and he knew then we had to look after the parents. That was the part of the job. We couldn't do anything more for the child. So the parents was the next thing that we had to look after, part of that holistic approach. And then he turned and looked at me, and I had tears running down my cheeks. And the look of horror on his face, like, what am I going to do? I've got to look after these family, and now I've got a co-worker that's crying. Where do I go? What do I do? So, and I wasn't crying. I was crying because I was sad, not because I was hurting or in pain like the family were. So, I guess those two gentlemen, Robbo and Bobby, both accepted that there was sometimes I was going to have tears, and it wasn't because I needed a hug or it wasn't anything. It was just that that was part of who I was. And I guess that the boys never cried. It wasn't manly to cry. So they hid their sorrow in other ways. But my sorrow was with the tears running down my cheeks. So as I said, I'll never forget the look on his face when he's gone, oh, I can just imagine what was going through his head. Oh my God, I've left kids at home that are crying and a wife crying, and now I've come to work and my partner's crying. So yeah, but we got through it. I spoke to both the older gentleman and said, look, that's just my way. I don't need you to do anything for me. That's just part of who I am. There were lots of times that I looked back on things. I wanted to make sure that what I was doing, if I made a mistake or if something wasn't as good as it could be, that it was not gender-based. So I was really fairly strong about making sure that things that were done correctly, and we weren't looking at things as part of my gender. So when I did, I would go back and look at something and say, no, well, that was because I probably had a bad day and I've made a mistake, or I haven't been trained properly, or I haven't listened when I've been trained, and I need to go back and look at that. I never ever did anything and went, wow, I didn't do that well because I was female. So I was adamant we could do that. I could do the job, females could do the job. And I'm really pleased now that we have that the ambulance service is employing people on their skills and their knowledge and not on their gender, because that doesn't make any difference. We need to employ people who can do the job and do it well. I'm really pleased we have 50%, and it's not gender driven, it's that we're employing people on their knowledge and their skills, and we know that 50% of those paramedics that are out there are female and they have the skills and the knowledge to do the job that they're employed to do. That's amazing. When I worked in Tumut, as I said, I was concerned that there were that it was family and friends that I was going out to do whatever I had to do to. But when I was, it was in the January, so I started in the April as an ambulance officer. It was in the January, and we had 2 drownings. I had 2 child drownings within 6 days of each other. And I remember at the time going back in, and one of the doctors was there certifying this child, and I said to my partner and to the doctor, I don't think I can do this job anymore. This just hurts too much. And the doctor swung around at me and he said, could you have changed anything? And I went, no, I can't change the circumstances. He said, then you're doing the best you can. You're helping the family that is left behind. You can't change anything. You're doing a good job. Why would you ever consider leaving? And I went home and thought about it. I thought, he's probably right. I can't, and it's the same as anyone going out today. You can't change the circumstances. You can't change that accident's happened. You can't change that person's cardiac arrested, but you can do the best you can for the person and for the family and the friends that are around them. So that was, and that certainly wasn't gender-based. That was just because, I don't know, probably I was a sook. And I was about me. It wasn't about the ambulance service or the family. It was about how I felt. So that was probably a bit selfish. It was painful to me, so I didn't want to do that or be part of that anymore. And I think that's the same today. We do things, and sometimes we're a bit selfish because we think that's caused me pain, so I don't want to have anything to do with it again. And that's exactly what that was after the second drowning. It was an achievement, and I think John Bradford was the superintendent that employed me, and he probably knew from the interview that I was perhaps stubborn. I wasn't going to let anyone beat me. I was going to prove that females could do the job, right or wrong. I proved that, and I'm happy that that's what I've proved. And I've got to say that John Bradford was an amazing man, a very forward-thinking man. I know Sydney a lot of the people in Sydney headquarters weren't very happy that this country superintendent had started with a female. And he always used to say, I employed that person for the skills and knowledge he had, not because of a gender. So I know that there was a bit of a stir about that, but I didn't care. I just wanted to prove I could do the job. And I did it, and we did it, and we're still doing it, because we're not a gender-based. We're here because we want to support our communities and care for our communities and care for our patients. That's why we're here, not because of our gender. When I did my interview, I think perhaps there might have been, we'll try and get her on something and say that she didn't pass the interview. So at the end of the interview, we had to drive a 4-wheel drive. And at that time, it was a F250. It was the snow vehicle, so it was way high off the ground. And after climbing into it, because that's what you had to do to get into it, was the mechanic took me for my driving interview. And we drove around, we come back and he said, you didn't use first gear. And I thought, oh no, Dad's led me down the wrong path. I'd been brought up in Tumut driving 4-wheel drives around the country, and Dad always said, you don't use first gear when you're in town. So I thought, oh, Dad's led me up the wrong path. And I said, oh, you don't use it in town. There's no need to use it in town. He went, oh, okay then. So I thought, oh, I think I've nailed that one. So, but I think that I had a feeling that was the one thing that they thought I may not have passed on. But I'd been driving a long time. I was brought up in the bush.